Are rogues the weakest class in D&D 5e now? You've probably heard that said. I've probably said something like it on this channel. And I think generally speaking, when it comes to martial characters, when we're just talking about damage, that's probably true for the most part. But today, we're going to do a build that proves the exception to that rule, if it is in fact a rule. And the best part, it's almost 100% rogue. Welcome to D4. Hey everybody, so here at D4, every week I take a deep dive into character builds for my favorite role-playing games. I like to crunch numbers about them, I like to theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you the right way or the best way to play a character, but to explore one potential way to build something in the hopes of creating a character that is both, powerful, but also really fun to play. So if you also enjoy creating characters for your favorite role-playing games, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build something that you're thinking about playing, or if you just really like theory crafting, then welcome home. This is absolutely where you belong, and I am so glad you're here. So thanks for watching. My name's Colby, and you are very skibbity. 15-year-old daughters give the best birthday presents. Okay, so longtime viewers of my channel have heard me complain about rogues a lot. It hasn't stopped me from using them in builds. I build rogue characters all the freaking time because I love them. I mained a rogue in World of Warcraft for like 7 years and will forever be in love with the sneaky, stealthy, hard-hitting, backstabbing from the shadows playstyle as a result, I think. But I guess that's kind of the problem for me with rogues in the current version of D&D 5e. They can be stealthy and sneaky and strike from the shadows, yes, but generally speaking, they just don't hit as hard as other martial characters. Lots of you like to point out that, hey, because they get so many other potent, useful things to do in-game, really solid skill-based utility, some fun survivability tools, easy ways to hit and run, etc., they shouldn't do as much damage as other martial characters. Let fighters and barbarians have something to excel at, dang it. Why do you always have to be crying for more, with every single character all the time? Well, to those counter-arguments, I suppose I would probably say something like, first of all, rogues don't have a monopoly on skill-based utility, right? Rangers, bards, and plenty of other classes, if you build them for it, can excel just about as well at stealth and lockpicking and trap finding. Some would argue that others can do it better. And hey, especially in the 2024 rule set, barbarians and fighters got a lot of nice utility bumps, right? And thanks to a higher hit die, better armor and shield proficiency, things like rage, they're already a lot better at survivability than rogues are. So if the rogue damage is left languishing, it can be easy to feel like they kind of just get outshone by every other class, my opinion. I think that's why, Chris, Treant Monk, for example, among others, right, has sort of made the claim in the past that they just might be the weakest class in D&D 5e, in the 2024 rule set. I don't know that I disagree with him. I don't really want to get into it too much further than that. Feel free to continue the arguments in the comments if you want. My point is this. With the relatively poor scaling on sneak attack, the thing that is supposed to help rogues keep up with other classes damage-wise, right? The best way to help rogues do great damage is to go for that old trick, finding a way to get them an attack on someone else's turn with their reaction so that they can apply sneak attack damage twice in a round because, yes, in case you didn't know, sneak attack very specifically says that you can add the bonus damage from it once per turn, not once per round, right? Again, feel free to fight about that in the comments if you'd like to as well. Now, I have done plenty of builds around this strategy. From the Berserker Lurker to the Quickened Blade and several others before and after. But none of them are going to be as potent as the one we build today, I don't think. And like I said in the intro, they're almost all rogue here with just one little multi-class dip. And the amazing damage that they do is going to be fairly sustainable thanks largely to the new and improved True Strike spell, and a little meta magic love. So let's jump into it. I proudly present D&D episode number 214, the Arcane Trickster 2.0, the smartest rogue, the double shot of pain, the Arcane Trick Shot, Arcane Trickster 2, Electric Boogaloo, True Strike Squared, Shoot You Baby one more time, Shot to the Heart. Right. Big thanks to the Discord users for all the amazing suggestions here as usual. I think I'm gonna go with the one from There's No Race Like Gnome yet again. Man, they are racking up some wins. Is anyone like keeping track of the score here? Anyways, the Arcane Sniper. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he put together for the build this week. He does this every week. If you'd be interested in following him on social media to see the other stuff that he's done, or to maybe try and commission him to create some art for your character or even your entire party, I will put links in the video description, as always, on how to do so. But first, you guys, I am so in love with what my sponsor for today's video is creating that I cannot wait to tell you about it. If you, like me, often find yourself needing more table for your table, then you are going to love Tabletop Table. Table. So yeah, I'm sure we've all been in this situation, right? We want to play our favorite game, whether D&D or even just a board game, but we don't have quite enough room to fit everything. Pieces are falling on the floor and the dog's chewing them up, right? You got to put your drink somewhere else because you can't fit it and all of your cards and resources and the game board itself on the table, right? Super frustrating. Well, behold, Tabletop Table. The answer to all of your problems, which is in Kickstarter right now at the time of this video release, but only for another few weeks. This thing is ingenious and yet so very simple. It's foldable, comes in its own carrying case so that you can take it with you wherever you want to be playing, and takes literally less than a minute to set up. And once you've got it, you can play on pretty much any table and have all the room you need, no matter how big or small your table might be, or heck, even if you got to sit on the floor, right? My favorite way to use it is, right here on our coffee table in our living room. Sure, the kitchen table's fine, but sometimes you just want to be more comfy and sit on the couch, right? Which also seats more people than our kitchen table. But the problem is the coffee table just isn't big enough to play like a real game on. Plus, I always got to bend over so far, right, to get to like the lower setting of the coffee table that by halfway through the game, my back starts hurting. Just me. Maybe I'm just getting old. But now I can whip out my tabletop table and have ample room for everything. Huh? Pretty great. Including my can of kombucha, because what else would you possibly be drinking on game night? And yeah, still enjoy being cozy when it's not my turn. And then when I'm done, I can pack it up in like 30 seconds and slide it under the bed so that my wife doesn't get annoyed with me having it out all the time. So, tabletop tables come in two different varieties. The Hexlite, which is a lightweight, travel and budget-friendly model made from premium-grade injection model plastic, or this, the Relic model, crafted from premium walnut hardwood, which is gorgeous, right? One of the things that I love most about the table actually are these like little accessories that come with, which are perfect for, holding your cards or, holding your dice or, eggs. Anyways, I would really love it if you guys would go check out their Kickstarter and support them. Use the link here at the bottom of the screen, tabletoptable.com/D4. You can find that in the video description and the pinned comment as always. And you'll enjoy 10% off or more on the table purchase by backing them now while they're in Kickstarter. Great way to save some money, help them reach their next stretch goal so that they can add more new awesomeness to this already awesome product. You won't regret it. Okay, huge thanks to Tabletop Tables. I really love what you guys have created here, and I'm super excited to see what you do next. Thanks for your support, and let's get back to the build. All right. At level 1, for our starting class, we are starting Rogue, and as I've said, we will mostly be a Rogue for the build today, and so yes, I love starting Rogue, even when we're multi-classing, because you get the extra skill proficiency, right, if you do it at level 1, and yes, I think this Rogue is potentially going to be about the best scouty, stealthy, lockpicky utility character I've ever built, outside of maybe the Swiss Army Soul Knife from a couple of months ago. But in some ways, we're actually going to be even better, and we'll definitely hit a heck of a lot harder. As for our species, we are going to go elf for reasons I'm sure you can guess, but as for the elf subspecies, just pick your favorite here, PYF, based on what you want most for your character. Or sure, go with Eladrin or Shadar Kai or Sea Elf even if you really want. Any of them will work great. As for our background, I'm going to say if you can, go with an old background or create a custom one, right, like I usually suggest. But If you can't, Merchant will be okay. It gives us the origin feat we want, which, as is the case for so many of my builds, will be the lucky feat here, telling us that every long rest we have a number of luck points equal to our proficiency bonus that we can use to either give ourselves advantage on a d20 roll of our choice, or to give disadvantage on other creatures' attacks against us, right? Rogues especially love on-demand advantage, so it's especially a favorite feat of mine to take for rogue builds. Okay, fine, let's be honest. I want advantage on all of my characters, but especially for rogues. Anyways, for our starting ability scores, I assume that we go the point buy method as always and say let's grab a 15 intelligence plus 2 there, a 14 dexterity, a 13 constitution plus 1 there, and then a 13 charisma, which we need for multiclassing. I would love to have that dexterity higher, but yes, we are going to be an intelligence-based rogue today, and it's gonna kind of be super awesome. As for equipment that we start out with here, go studded leather, and then a light crossbow. So yes, we are also going to be a ranged damage dealer today, though there's a melee version of this build that you could do and make work if you wanted. For sure, in that case, you'd want to grab a rapier here instead. More on how that would work a little bit later. I mean, in fact, sure, I would grab a rapier as well regardless, so that you could have a solid melee option when you needed or wanted, because yeah, at Rogue 1 we get weapon masteries, right? We get 2 of them. So we could take the light crossbow for 1, which has the slow mastery. So now when we hit with a light crossbow, we could slow the enemy's movement by 10 feet until our next turn, which is especially handy if we're trying to keep enemies away from us, right? Which we probably should be with our low armor class and mediocre hit die. But then we could also take the rapier as a weapon mastery, right? Which gives the Vex mastery, so that if we hit with the rapier, if the enemy has gotten all up in our grill, then the next attack we make against them before the end of our next turn would have advantage. It's not bad. We also get Thieves' Cant at Rogue 1, that special language that only, those who speak it can speak. Oh, thanks, Mr. Obvious. And then we get Expertise, right? Double our proficiency bonus in 2 skills of our choice that we are proficient in. And as always, pick your favorites here, PYF, but if it were me, I'd probably take Perception, especially with our dumped Wisdom, and then either Stealth or Sleight of Hand, whichever you think more important. And then finally at Rogue 1, we get Sneak Attack, which says that once on a turn, if we're attacking with a ranged or finesse weapon and have advantage on the attack, or the target is standing next to one of our allies, we can add a d6 of damage to the attack, scaling up by another d6 every other rogue level, right? This will be our primary source of damage, making it super important for us to get as many rogue levels as possible. You know what I love to have as many of as possible? Channel members and patrons. Oh, that feels a little greedy. Whatever. Anyways, huge shout out and thank you to my channel members and patrons. You guys are the best. I could not do what I do without you. Truly couldn't. Thank you so much for your support. Everybody else, I would love it if you just consider joining as a channel member or patron. Check the video description for links on how to check out, what that looks like. I give all of my perks to my channel members that just sign up at the silver level or higher and ask that you simply pay what you think it's worth or what you feel like you can afford. Those perks include access to the library of write-ups that I do for all of my builds to help you recreate the characters a little more easily yourself if you want to. Access to the community Discord server where you can help me name my builds every week, among other things, and access to the live Q&A monthly hangout sessions that we do. If you are not interested or don't feel like you can afford supporting me in that way, that's fine. I'm glad that you're just here and watching and liking and subscribing especially, right? Those are great ways to support the channel too, so thanks. Okay, at level 2, we get Cunning Action. This lets us take the dash, disengage, or hide actions as a bonus action. That's really nice if we need it. But then at level 3, we get Steady Aim. First of all, this lets us get advantage on our next attack this turn only if we spend our bonus action, haven't moved, and then give up our, move speed for the rest of the turn. This is a little less painful on a ranged character than a melee one, generally, though we will have both a consistent, better, I think, use of our bonus action and some fairly reliable sources of advantage, so I'm hoping we won't need this very often. Though it'll be nice to have if we do need it sometimes. But then we also here get our rogue subclass, and in case you couldn't tell by all of the titles I was throwing around, we are going to go with, let's be honest, what's probably the strongest rogue subclass in the game, the Arcane Trickster, because spells. And yeah, I think especially if you're going to build a mostly rogue character, it's pretty hard to beat the power of an arcane trickster, like I tried to show in this video here from about a year ago. As an arcane trickster, we get a couple of abilities. First up, Mage Hand Légèrement, which says that we can cast and use Mage Hand as a bonus action, make it invisible, and use it to do sleight of hand checks for long range pickpocketing, trap disarming, lockpicking, etc. And honestly, that's a pretty amazing like ribbon feature, right? Really helping keep you safe from potential traps and just get up into invisible shenanigans otherwise. In fact, I would love to hear like your favorite story of somebody who used an invisible mage hand in the comment section. There's probably some pretty good bangers out there as far as hijinks go. But anyways, yes, then we get wizard spells, of course, right, as an arcane trickster. And at this level, we get Mage Hand plus 2 other cantrips, and then gloriously, any 3 wizard spells of our choice, no longer restricted to a certain school of magic. So very good. As for the spells that we should take, I would grab Shield, naturally, for a very nice reaction defense to increase your AC by 5 for the rest of the round when you get it. So very strong, though admittedly, on this build, I hope to be using our reaction pretty much every round when possible. Still, nice to have if you'd rather sacrifice damage because you don't want to die. Not a bad choice, frankly, if it's one that you need to make. But then the other 2 spells that we're going to take here, we need to spend a little time on. Get comfortable. First, True Strike. True Strike is really the spell this whole build kind of is based on. Treant Monk put out a video on how good True Strike is on rogues a few months ago. Check it out right up there if you haven't seen it. And yeah, it's really good for a number of reasons. First off, similar to the blade cantrips of yore, Booming and Green Flame Blade, right? When you cast True Strike, you simultaneously make a weapon attack. Also, similarly, that attack gets to add extra damage once you hit character level 5, though it is slightly less damage in True Strike's case. It's a d6 instead of d8s, right? And scaling to 2 and 3d6 eventually. The key differences between True Strike and the blade trips are these. First, when you make the attack, you use your spellcasting modifier to hit and damage instead of strength or dex with True Strike. Hence, the reason we are prioritizing intelligence on this build, right? And no, this is not optional. You use your casting stat, period. It's not, you can use your casting stat if you want to, like Shillelagh, for example, right? The other key difference is that True Strike doesn't require a melee attack like the blade trips do. We can make a ranged weapon attack with it if we want to, and that's perfect for our squishy selves. All of that said, yes, you could totally do this build as a melee character, and if you wanted to, use Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade instead, and in that case you could totally build it as a dexterity first character instead as well, right? Which would be better for our armor class, for our roguish, stealthy, lockpicky skills, right? Almost decided to build it that way for the video today, since I typically make myself beholden to the spreadsheet and tend to favor damage overall, and just say, you know, you figure out where you want to sacrifice some damage in the name of survivability or versatility, etc. But I just couldn't, in good conscience, go that route in the end today, I think. First, because we're going to be using our bonus action pretty much every round for damage, meaning no cunning action to disengage and get to safety, right? And 2, because we're also going to hopefully be using our reaction every round for damage, meaning no uncanny dodge when we get it to have damage against ourselves, or use the shield spell for that matter, like I said. So yeah, trying to eke out a teeny bit more damage by going melee and using the slightly harder hitting cantrips just didn't make any kind of sense to me when we were a fairly squishy rogue that won't be able to use our defensive tools very often if we're trying to maximize our damage. Cool. As for the other spell that we want to pick up here, it's Find Familiar, of course. Usually, if I use the spell, I do a really quick, the familiar can take the help action to grant advantage on one attack and move on. But about once a year or so, I feel like due to the increased questions about the tactic that I start seeing in the comments, I need to stop and spend a couple of minutes explaining this, talking about how it works, going over pros and cons, etc. And today is going to be that day, so feel free to skip ahead a bit if you don't want to argue about the nitty-gritty here. Right, so rules as written. We are told that a familiar rolls its own initiative and can't attack, unless you're Pact of the Chain Warlock, not going to talk about that today, but can otherwise take an action in combat as normal, right? This means then that they could, yes, take the help action, which says that you basically distract a chosen enemy. Maybe you squeak loudly in their ear, fly in their face, tickle their bum, etc. And then the next attack made against that enemy that you have helped, or in this case that your familiar has helped, is made with advantage. That's rules as written. If you're playing at a table that adheres to raw with the familiar, then it could take the help action on its turn, but if you aren't the next person to attack the enemy that they've helped against, right, then you might not get any advantage from your familiar's action. Someone else at your table would, though, so it's still great. However, the way it works at every table that I have ever played at, yes, including Treant Monks and Monty's from the Dungeon Dudes and my own home table, is like a homebrew version of this that just speeds up gameplay and simplifies things. The familiar basically goes on your turn and helps whoever they want to help, granting advantage to that character's first attack, very often the owner of the familiar. Not for the first time. I put a couple of different polls out on my channel a couple of weeks ago to sort of gauge where you all were on the issue, and in the end, the vast majority of you, nearly 80%, with close to 3,000 votes at the time that I'm recording this anyway, say that at your table, if you want to get advantage on your first attack from your familiar, you generally can, whether because it works like I've described at the tables that I've played at, right, or because of some other reason. Like you can have your familiar hold their action to help until right before the chosen character's turn, etc. Though, yes, I appreciate that can be complicated if the familiar isn't already in position when they need to help. Rules as written, right? Don't at me, bro. And so even though I appreciate that it isn't strictly necessarily rules as written, since the vast majority of you seem to be able to get advantage from a familiar if you really want it, I tend to use the tactic in builds a fair bit. All of that said, let me take a moment to address some of the more common concerns that people expressed in the comments to that poll. The first is along the lines of, if a familiar uses that tactic more than once, they're dead. Okay, so yeah, that is a thing that can potentially happen. To that, I would say, first off, if you make your familiar an owl, like I usually mention, it has the flyby ability, which lets it disengage without taking an opportunity attack. And with 60 feet of fly speed, that's very often enough to get in, help, and fly to relative safety without getting hit. Of course, if the enemy has a ranged attack or can themselves fly, they might be able to take out the familiar anyways. And to that, I would say, if the enemy is using an attack and maybe even their movement to take out your familiar, then kudos to you. That's a win in my book. You can resummon that familiar with 10 gold and a 10-minute ritual, right? Totally worth it. So go for it, DM. And sure, familiars can get fairly easily wiped out with a big area of effect spell or, attack otherwise, right? But again, if you've got your owl staying relatively far away from the fight, that fireball or whatever probably got placed somewhat unoptimally to try and catch the familiar too. And I mean, how many enemies are you fighting that regularly have fireball or something like it? And also, finally, raw, I don't know that there's a reason you couldn't have your familiar just fly into your backpack every turn to stay safe. Maybe that's cheesy. Maybe your DM isn't going to allow it, but I've seen it work at a lot of tables. Worth asking your DM about. Okay, the other big comment I saw on that poll went something like, this is overpowered or cheesy or annoying, and we just don't allow it, and every time I see a build that depends on a familiar, I immediately lose interest and stop watching, etc., etc. And I mean, first of all, that's absolutely fine for you to feel that way, and it doesn't upset me in the slightest. I will say, though, that I don't think I've ever done a build that uses a familiar to grant advantage on one attack where the build depended on that advantage. And it was just worthless if it didn't work, right? The reality is it's nice, sure, but at lower enemy ACs, it makes almost no difference to the numbers. And even at higher enemy ACs, especially for builds where you're getting more than one attack per turn, which is most of my damage focused builds, it makes some difference, sure, but it's not huge. It definitely doesn't invalidate a build or anything. It's more like, if this doesn't work at your table, or if your DM likes to try and kill your familiar, that's fine, just lower your expectations slightly for damage numbers at the mid and higher enemy ACs, Okay, all done with the familiar discussion for another year. You still with me? Good, because you need to remember that at this level, our sneak attack goes up to 2d6. At level 4, we get our first general feat, and yes, we're going with Elven Accuracy, of course, because it's amazing. It lets us bump, our intelligence by 1. You could also do Charisma or Dexterity or Wisdom if you wanted. And says that when we attack with advantage using, for us, our intelligence, then we can roll 3 d20s instead of 2, basically, and that's great, especially at higher enemy armor classes. And again, if you can't use older content at your table, or don't want to be an elf, or take this feat because it just makes you inexplicably angry for some reason, that is fine. Don't. It will have a minor impact on your damage numbers at mid and higher enemy ACs. I love it, and I'm not ashamed. All right, at this point though, I think it's time to do a little bit of multi-classing. At level 5, I want to take a couple of levels in Sorcerer, and I think it makes a pretty smooth roleplay for an Arcane Trickster to take some Sorcerer levels. The magic burgeoning inside of you that you've been learning and practicing suddenly surges for a time. Maybe your practice of the Arcane has activated something that lay dormant inside of you all of your life. Maybe you've just become enamored with your magical skills and discoveries and decide to focus your time and energy on enhancing and improving those talents for a while. Whatever your reason, as a Sorcerer 1, we get Innate Sorcery, which is really fantastic in that it says twice per day with a bonus action we can buff ourselves for 1 minute so that our Sorcerer spell DC increases by 1, and so that we have advantage on the attack rolls of Sorcerer spells we cast. Now, does this mean that if we used Innate Sorcery first, our True Strike spell castings would just automatically have advantage? Not necessarily, because, see, it's specifically our Sorcerer spells that would benefit. Now, we could take True Strike as a Sorcerer spell, sure, but the problem there is that in that case it would use our Charisma for the casting and not our Intelligence, and as an Arcane Trickster, we're specifically told that our spell casting stat is Intelligence, right? Of course, we could have just gone with a high Charisma on this character instead of Intelligence and waited to use True Strike until now, or sure, grabbed the spell via the Magic Initiate Wizard Origin feat, taking it instead of Lucky, and determined back then that we would use Charisma for the spell, right, when we take the feat. But since we're mostly going to be a rogue, and most of the spells we get will be using our Intelligence, and we already have some decent sources of advantage, I'm not going to worry about it too much. If you would rather be a Charisma first character here, go for it. And hey, maybe you can talk to your DM and they'll be fine to just let you have Innate Sorcery work to give you advantage on your True Strike, regardless of whether you're using it with Intelligence or Charisma, you know, if we're calling it a Wizard spell or a Sorcerer spell, but just know the rules and discuss with your DM and plan accordingly. As for the Sorcerer spells that we should take as a level 1 Sorcerer here, I'm just going to say PYF. Probably grab stuff that doesn't depend on your casting stat much, right? So maybe take Shield now and then swap that spell out for something else when you gain another rogue level. Things like Message are always great for telepathic communication if you didn't take that yet. Have fun with it. Don't forget, though, also at level 5 now, True Strike is going to add a d6 of damage if it hits. At level 6, we would be a Sorcerer 2, and that means we get Font of Magic, our sorcery points. We get 1 sorcery point per sorcerer level so that we can create more spell slots with them, or cannibalize our spell slots to gain sorcery points, right? Because we really like to use those points for meta magic, which we get at Sorcerer 2 now. We get 2 meta magic options to enhance our spells in a variety of ways, and the one we really got to have for this build is, of course, my favorite, Quickened Spell, which lets us cast a spell that normally has a casting time of an action as a bonus action instead. It costs 2 sorcery points. Wait, we only have 2 sorcery points. You said this was going to be sustained damage. Right. Remember that whenever you want, you can cannibalize your spell slots to create sorcery points, and it doesn't even take a bonus action to do this anymore. You get 1 point for every level of spell slot you consume. And hey, thanks to multiclassing, 4 levels of Arcane Trickster with 2 levels of a full caster, we actually have the spell slots of a 3rd level full caster now, right? Meaning that yes, we now have 2 second level spell slots and 4 first level spell slots, which is enough, potentially, if we needed them, for 10 sorcery points total, or 5 castings of Quicken Spell. And this all comes together just in time for our first damage report. Alright, let's talk about what combat would ideally look like for us here then. It's actually fairly simple. On our turn, We quicken True Strike, or sure, Booming or Green Flame Blade if you want to be in melee, right? To make an attack with our bonus action. It would do a D8 for the light crossbow, a D6 for True Strike, 2d6 for sneak attack, plus 4 for our intelligence modifier. With our action, we would simply ready the action, right, to do the exact same thing when it's no longer our turn. Remember, doing this requires us to set the trigger, right? What's going to cause you to take the reaction to do the thing. But you could always make that trigger as soon as enemy X starts to do anything. Or yeah, if you're playing rules as written with the familiar and they're taking their turn later on in the round, you could make the trigger as soon as my familiar takes the help action, right? Take that, hardcore rules lawyers. Anyways, as soon as the trigger happens, you True Strike again, repeating the damage. Keep in mind that this requires us to use our reaction, and since we're casting a spell, requires us to concentrate on readying that spell, meaning we can't be concentrating on anything else for this build. That's okay. I think being able to double up on sneak attack twice in a round and extra True Strike damage too is worth it. But yeah, if you take damage before the trigger goes off and fail your concentration check, you'd actually lose the ability to True Strike with your reaction. So if you can, try and make the trigger something like as soon as my turn is over, or as soon as the next player in combat does anything, something like that, right? Some of you may find that a little cheesy, so as always, talk it over with your DM. Now, I'm going to assume that we have advantage on all of our attacks except one. I average damage over a 4-round combat encounter. I'm assuming that we'll get advantage from our familiar on one attack every round and use up our 3 luck points on most of the others, right? So yeah, this build works best if you're only having 1 combat encounter per day, especially since you're going to run out of sorcery points too, right? So conserve your resources and lower your expectations on the numbers, as always, if you tend to have more combat encounters in a day, though we will get a little more breathing room resource-wise as we gain more levels. And yeah, Elven Accuracy plus advantage is going to do really nice things for our hit and crit chance, even at higher enemy ACs. And so, against an enemy with a 10 armor class here, we would on average over 4 rounds do 42 damage per round. And against a 15 AC, it would be slightly less, 41 DPR. And that is super, super solid, but not blowing the doors off of other builds or anything. Just kind of comfortably in the middle of tier 1 compared to other sustained damage builds that I've done to date at this level. And that is a great place to be, especially considering how much fantastic utility we're bringing to the table. Okay. Rogue damage scales infamously poorly. If we're doubling up on sneak attack every round, can we stay in tier 1? Let's find out. Because at level 7, yeah, with quicken spell and more spell slots secured, I think we get back to rogue, meaning we would be a rogue 5, and that would give us the new cunning strike, which is pretty awesome. It says that when we add sneak attack to a hit, we can give up 1d6 of the damage to instead try and poison an enemy if they fail a constitution save. That's nice, giving them disadvantage on ability checks and attacks for a minute, right? Though they do get to repeat the save at the end of each turn. We could also try and trip them by sacrificing a d6 of sneak attack damage, knocking them prone if they fail a dex save. And I kind of love the idea of tripping them from range with a crossbow bolt. Maybe you hit them in the kneecap and they go down, right? Of course, if we're attacking from range, we'd have disadvantage on a prone target. So don't do this until your last attack, right? To maybe give melee allies advantage on their attacks after your turn is over. Finally, you can withdraw with Cunning Strike so that you can move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. And yeah, for a rogue who's using their bonus action to attack and thus not for cunning action, this could be nice if someone's getting up in your business. Of course, we could always pull out our rapier in that case, right? And just True Strike with it instead, right? We don't need to be too worried, except for defensively. But then at this level, we also get Uncanny Dodge here to have the damage of a single attack against us, though, like I've said, since it uses our reaction, I don't think we'd be using this as much as other rogues. Still nice to have if we really need it. Finally, don't forget that sneak attack goes up to 3d6 every time we hit with it, which, as I like to say when I do rogue builds that try to get a reaction attack every round, is really like getting a 2d6 increase for us, and that feels a lot more significant. Okay, at level 8, we would be a rogue 6, and that means we get another round of expertise. And sure, as always, PYF here, but if it were me, I think I would take either stealth or sleight of hand, whichever I didn't take at level 1, and then probably investigation, since sometimes you need that to figure out how a trap works before you try to disarm it, among other things. At level 9, we would be a rogue 7, and that means we get that wonderful defensive ability Evasion that lets you take half damage on a failed save against fireballs and things like them, and no damage on a successful one. I wish that our familiar could have that. And then the incredible reliable talent now, as early as level 7, right? So that any skill check you make in a skill that you have proficiency in always rolls at least a 10 if you roll lower than that, right? So dang good. What's more, as an arcane trickster, we now have 2nd level wizard spells. And I'm just gonna say PYF here too, since we're not using any of them for damage, and we might very well be using up most of our spell slots for sorcery points anyways, if we're crazy. But there are a ton of great options to pick from here, especially if we want to focus on utility, right? Things like borrowed knowledge for an extra skill proficiency, potentially perfect with reliable talent now, right? Or enhance ability or invisibility, sure, or yeah, knock if you broke your last lockpick to just open the lock anyways, or mirror image to make yourself harder to hit, or misty step for easy teleportation, or rope trick for fun shenanigans, or spider climb to get up walls, or vortex warp to move creatures around. Just so many great options here for someone trying to be the best rogue they can be, especially, right? Don't forget, sneak attack scales to 4d6 at this level, and that brings us to our next damage report. Since last check, the only thing we've really done to increase our damage is get some scaling on sneak attack, though we have picked up a ton of utility, survivability, and even debuffing potential along the way. And so, against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would on average do 58 damage per round, and against a 16 AC, it would be 56 DPR. And hey, for a mostly rogue, that's actually a pretty solid damage increase. Getting to sneak attack twice a round makes all the difference in the world. So yeah, that keeps us kind of mid-tier 1 territory, and that makes me super happy. It is true, though, that we are giving up a lot for this kind of damage, right? Not only most of our spell slots, but also our luck points, and perhaps most painfully, both our bonus action and our reaction every single round. I love that we can keep this up in theory, but I know that a lot of times, depending on the day, depending on your table, you might not quite get to this level of damage if you've got to disengage or use shield once in a while or uncanny dodge, right, to stay alive, or are having lots of combat encounters every day, etc., etc. But I mean, to be fair, you could put an asterisk next to almost all of my builds, right? So I don't feel too bad about it. It's fun to see what's possible. Let's keep going. At level 10, we would be a rogue 8, and that means we get another feat, and I think I'd just bump intelligence here for damage and spellcasting purposes, taking it to 20, though there are plenty of half feats that I would love to have. Most of them increase dexterity. So yeah, maybe I'm not going to prioritize those half feats quite so much on this build. At level 11, we would be a rogue 9, and that means we get magical ambush, which says that if we have the invisible condition when we cast a spell on a creature, and again, we gain that condition when we successfully hide, right? We don't have to have the invisible spell on ourselves or anything. But if we do this, then that creature that has the spell cast on them has disadvantage on the saving throw against the spell, and that's pretty awesome. I've always wanted to build an intelligence-based arcane trickster to take better advantage of this ability, but this is the first time that I've actually done so. This could be a super potent way to open up combat, right? Stealth up on a group and then throw out web to restrain a whole gaggle of baddies, and they all have disadvantage on the save against it. Or hold person on a single one to paralyze them. Or sure, later, fireball. We have 3rd level spell slots now thanks to multiclassing, but we're not going to have 3rd level spells for a hot minute still. So yeah, lots of fun potential here. Just remember that we can't concentrate on a spell and hold our action to use True Strike, so choose accordingly. Finally, we get some nice passive bumps here. Sneak attack goes up to 5d6, and True Strike does an extra 2d6 now when we hit with it. At level 12, we would be a rogue 10, and rogues get a bonus feat. Hooray! I think I'm probably bumping dexterity, taking it to 16. You could maybe consider bumping wisdom instead, or take resilient wisdom, or sure, a nice dexterity-based half feat like crossbow expert, or sharpshooter, or maybe even mage slayer. Not bad ideas, worth considering. I guess I'm just kind of like, our rapier does as much damage as a light crossbow, and we can use True Strike with either. But if you really want to commit to going ranged, then, I don't know, maybe we've got an amazing magic crossbow and just a crappy mundane rapier, right? So sure, grab Crossbow Expert here, if not sooner, so that you don't have disadvantage on attacks with your crossbow when people are within 5 feet of you, right? And then you want Sharpshooter later to help you with enemies taking cover, especially if you play at a table where like other creatures standing between you and the enemy you're shooting at are going to grant, half cover or something to the enemy you're trying to hit. In that case, Sharpshooter is kind of necessary, but I get the impression based on polls that I've done that that doesn't come up for a lot of you at your table. So anyways, prioritize Sharpshooter if it does. At level 13, we would be a Rogue 11, and that means we get improved Cunning Strike, which says that we can use 2 Cunning Strike options on a single attack if we want, though we do have to pay the cost for each of them. Fortunately, our sneak attack does 6d6 at this level, so we've got some d6s to spare if we need them. But this is just in time for our next damage report. Since last check, we've capped our intelligence, gained a couple more d6s to sneak attack, seen a little bump to True Strike, and as always gained some nice utility to boot. So against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would on average do 84 damage per round, and against a 17 AC, it would be 82 DPR. And honestly, that's pretty phenomenal. Outpacing every single rogue build I've done to date now for sustained damage, and continuing to keep us in the middle of tier 1, and I am here for it. What a difference double sneak attack makes, right? All right, let's see if we can stick the landing. At level 14, we would be a Rogue 12, and that means we get another feat. And again, I'm probably bumping Dexterity to help out with my armor class and skills and initiative, though, like I've said, you could go another route, maybe taking a second Dex-based half feat to get to 16 Dexterity here instead, right? But enjoying the other benefits that those feats give. At level 15, we would be a Rogue 13, and that means as an Arcane Trickster, we get a Versatile Trickster, which is nice, but maybe slightly less nice for those of us trying to play a ranged rogue. It says that when you use the trip option of Cunning Strike, thanks to our Mage Hand, you can use the option on another creature too within 5 feet of your Mage Hand, right? Potentially really cool. I mean, it could really help out your melee allies again, or at the very least slow down your enemies in an important way, or if we've got our Rapier out, to give us advantage on attacks against more enemies. But it's not quite as awesome if we're trying to make ranged attacks against those enemies that we might be knocking prone, yeah. We do finally get 3rd level wizard spells here too, and there are a lot to choose from that we want. Just remember, we don't typically want to be casting anything that requires concentration in combat, but there's a lot of great utility stuff like Catnap, Tiny Hut, and Fly, or there's stuff like Counterspell or Dispel Magic, which are great when we really need them, or sure, Fireball to just open up on a surprised group with a big kaboom, right? What about the Haste spell? Let's discuss. Haste is great in that it bumps our armor class, doubles our move speed, gives us advantage on dexterity saves, and above all, gives us an extra action every turn that we can use to potentially make 1 additional attack. So yeah, in theory, you could say Quicken True Strike, make a weapon attack, and still hold your action for a reaction attack, right? The problem is the extra action granted by haste does not allow you to cast a spell, so no true striking with it, nor does it allow you to ready the action. And worst of all, since it requires concentration, you couldn't ready a true strike, you could only ready an attack. And with our 18 dexterity, that lowers the hit chance and damage slightly, plus causes us to miss out on the bonus damage from true strike. On this build, I don't really think haste is worth it. Maybe if you're running low on sorcery points, it would be worth considering so that you could just make an attack with the hasted action, ready a regular attack with your normal action, and like make an attack with the reaction, right? It's basically a lower damage but less resource intensive way to go about things. And it might be worth keeping in your back pocket on days when you're having a lot of combat encounters, right? If you think that you might go this route when you get to this level, there's a strong argument for getting our dexterity up as quickly as possible, or even building from the beginning for a dex-based build like I've talked about, though. I mean, we're level 15 here. That's a long time to wait for this to come into play, yeah? Maybe for a high-level one-shot. Anyways, don't forget that sneak attack gets a bump to 7d6 here as well. At level 16, I'll admit that I was tempted here to finish off the build in Fighter. It would be nice to get a fighting style, right? Archery adds a +2 to our hit chance. And yeah, get some better weapon proficiency so that we could upgrade from this crappy light crossbow we've been using, right? Give me a heavy crossbow or sure, even a musket. I'd say if you want to commit to a different weapon on this build, get a level or 2 of fighter way earlier, maybe right at level 1, or if not, perhaps at level 7. +2 to hit and a little more weapon damage from a better weapon, right, would be nice. That said, with elven accuracy, if we have reliable advantage, we don't gain a ton from +2 to hit, a little, but we don't need it as much as other builds might. And a little more weapon damage is great, but probably not worth sacrificing the sneak attack gains, especially if we're getting to use sneak attack twice per round. And sure, action surge is awesome, but I'm not confident that we could true strike with our regular action and then action surge to ready true strike with our reaction. It's a little blurry, I think, rules-wise. You can't use the magic action with the extra action granted by action surge, but some might argue that they're not taking the magic action, they're readying their action and then just so happen to be readying the magic action, right? And that's different, even though they're readying a spell. I don't know. Even if you could pull off one more true strike in a round once per short rest, it's some nice burst, but I think I'd just rather scale my sneak attack. And actually, even more important than that, arguably, are the nice rogue features that we get at Rogue 14 and 15. So let's just stay the course here, stay with Rogue, because as a Rogue 14, we get Devious Strikes, and this is pretty stellar. 3 new Cunning Strike options. Daze to force a Constitution save, or the enemy can only take an action or a bonus action, not both. That costs 2d6 of our sneak, but it's pretty nice. Obscure, even better I think, to force a Dexterity save, or give the enemy the blinded condition until the end of their next turn. It costs 3d6, but it's pretty powerful. But best of all, we get the Knockout option, which costs a hefty 6d6, but forces a Constitution save, or the enemy is just straight up unconscious for a minute, or until they take damage. They do get to repeat the save at the end of every turn, but yeah, I love the idea of like an enemy runs up to engage you in melee and you pull out your rapier, true strike, and knock them out cold on your turn. And then auto crit them with your reaction since they're unconscious, right? Doubling all of your sneak attack dice plus your true strike and weapon dice would be totally worth giving up 66 of your sneak attack on your turn, right? Granted, knockout is a Constitution save, so it's by no means a guarantee, though it's a little better with the updated monster manual than it used to be. And maybe you'd be better just leaving them knocked out than, getting an auto crit on them, but that would just be so cool to pull off in game. It's like, oh, you thought you'd close the gap on a ranged damage dealer, eh? Bad idea, bub. Kaboom! Finally for us, at level 17 we would be a Rogue 15, and that means we get Slippery Mind, giving us proficiency in Charisma and, holy cow, Wisdom saving throws. It's pretty fantastic at a level, especially when failing Wisdom saves gets to be super painful, and we have a lousy Wisdom score. Also though, thanks to multiclassing, we now get 4th level spell slots for either upcasting or many more sorcery points. Yeah. Going Arcane Trickster here really makes the build's damage pretty sustainable once we get into mid-game and beyond especially. Finally, don't forget that Sneak Attack bumps to 8d6 here, and True Strike now does 3d6 when we hit with it. And that is all just in time for our final damage report. Since last check, we've seen a couple of bumps to Sneak Attack, a bump to True Strike, and then loads of additional utility, defense, and even debuffing, burst, and area of effect damage capabilities too. So much diversity and versatility at our fingertips now. But against enemies with a 10 armor class here, we would on average over a 4-round combat encounter do 108 damage per round. And against an 18 AC, it would be 106 DPR. And we did it, guys. We broke the century mark on a mostly rogue build. The only time I've ever done that, aside from the aforementioned Berserker Lurker. And I mean, that build started with 5 levels of Barbarian and was even less sustainable than this because they were taking a level of exhaustion every combat encounter. And yeah, compared to other sustained DPR builds to date at this level, we're in the same place as always. Tier 1, though admittedly kind of closer to the bottom of Tier 1, but still. Fantastic. So let's go over some final thoughts here. The tier score for this build, if you take the damage they do at each of the enemy armor classes we calculate for at each of the 4 damage reports, just average it into one big number, we end up with a 66, which, as expected, puts us in the middle of tier 1, and that is reason to celebrate. So, okay, how sustainable is this damage, really? Sure, like a lot of builds, and especially at early levels, the sustainability is really only manageable for 1 combat encounter per day. That said, by the time we get to like 3 second level spell slots, which for us would come at character level 8, we could probably pull off our combo on most rounds for a couple of combat encounters per day. Granted, we might run out of luck points, and if our familiar is getting targeted, then the advantage isn't going to last for every attack, but there are always things you can do to go into melee and try and trip a target. Or sure, maybe someone in your party is casting Bless or Fairy Fire, or you have a +1 or 2 weapon for that matter. The best laid plans oft go awry, but I mean, hey, plans going awry is part of what makes D&D fun and interesting, right? And the good news is that even when they do go awry, and they will, you've got a slew of wizard and sorcerer spells to help you deal with what the enemies are throwing at you. You still do solid damage, even with just 1 attack per round. And you bring boatloads of utility and ways to mix it up in game, both in and out of combat. So for my money, the build gets a 10 on the fun, interesting, and versatile scale, even if you can't always double True Strike every single round. But when you can, you will be hitting with the hardest hitters in the game. And that just makes me all warm and fuzzy inside. Wait, you get all warm and fuzzy when you imagine hurting others? No! I mean, yes, actually, but only when it's imaginary. And I know for sure that they're evildoers. You know what I mean. Anyways, that's the build for the week. I hope you guys loved it. I know I did. And I'm considering playing them in a one-shot very soon to try them out. I hope that you know that I love you. Thank you so much for all that you do for me and for the channel. You guys are the best. I hope you have a great day and a fantastic week. And if you don't, please, please, please don't give up. Hang in there. You got this. I hope that you will do good and be kind, and that I see you again very soon. But until then, take care. Bye. You can grab the linens, we can make the bed all nice and watch a movie in it. Talk about your day all night, just a proposition, but I think it sounds pretty good to me. How about that? You and me, lots of love in tiny things. All we have is all I need. Lots of love and tiny. My new favorite band, they're called Tiny Habits. And that song is the first song off it's the title track off of their first album. It's called Tiny Things. And it's so good. Oh my gosh, you guys. These guys are amazing. I don't really know anything about them. My wife randomly sent me something that they did on like Facebook or Instagram or something. And I listened to it and instantly went out and bought the first album, and I've been listening to it nonstop for like a week. The harmonies are amazing. They're kind of an indie folk pop type sound to them, with just like a hint of soul, maybe just a smattering. Anyways, super good. Check them out. Tiny Habits. Woo! That is some short hair. I mean, like for 20 years of my life, I wore my hair like this or something like it, right? If you watch any video that's more than 2 years old, you will notice this. And you would think that my children would not be so surprised when I cut my hair like once a year, just to kind of go old school. It's summertime, it's hot, you know, I want to just be a little bit lighter. But yeah, they were all very dismayed. My second child, my oldest daughter, Emmy, she looked at me and she was like, "It's okay, it'll grow back." I was like, I did this on purpose. I kind of like how it looks. But then she totally made up for it by giving me this amazing t-shirt that she made in her art class. You're very skibbity, meow. It's like my new favorite t-shirt. So anyways, yeah, totally redeemed herself there. But I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, I was kind of liking the longer hair. I've been growing it out really for a couple, 3 years now, off and on. Maybe I should stop. Maybe I should stop going short. You can let me know your preference in the comments. Give me a skull and crossbones if you like the longer hair, and a sunbeam if you like it shorter. Oh, the shirt she did it with like acrylic paint though, and it's like refusing to dry. It's just getting smears and smudges everywhere. It's even showing up on my arms now. Oh, awesome. Or is it 213? I think it's 214. Yeah, I think I've been off. Let's just double check that, shall we? 214. Okay. Yeah, so 214. As soon, and they're going, and like every time we hit with it, plus your true strike drive, bumped is true. Meow.